Hello, everyone. This is a tale about compassion and courage from Colombia. How it feels to be the recipient of compassion and the courage it can take to both give it and receive it when it involves two strangers across an apparent cultural divide. But the story starts not in Colombia, but in Seafield Road, Edinburgh, just a few miles down from here where we are tonight on a grey November day. And it starts when I am under a 20-ton tipper lorry, watching the wheels coming towards my head. That incident led to around 7 or 8 operations, intensive physiotherapy that continues to this day, and a lot of psychological counselling that continues to this day. But what I want to talk to you tonight is not about that incident itself, although I'm sure we can talk about it later, but what it eventually led to in terms of my understanding of compassion in a northern and very remote region of Colombia. Now, last week, in amongst the momentous news about the EU referendum, there was also another piece of momentous news in Latin America. And 52 years ago, after the deaths of more than 200,000 people, the displacement of between 5 and 6 million people, the Colombian government and the FARC rebel group finally signed a peace deal. This was a huge day in Colombia that barely got a mention here because of other things that were going on. And while people in Colombia are now suffering less political violence, insecurity is a massive issue for the majority of the population, whether it be political, whether it be narco-trafficking, whether it be street violence, whether it be corruption. And apart from the insecurity issue, the other thing that Colombians tell me they fear the most is getting ill, because the healthcare system in Colombia is not like we have here. And outside the major cities, it's very difficult indeed. Colombia is not just a place of violence, though. It has fantastic aspects, too. It's very famous for its biodiversity, and it's absolutely cycling mad. And so, as you heard, I used to work for the RSPB, so I went to Colombia for the biodiversity and for the cycling, because I'm also a cycle activist. And I speak Spanish, so it's perfect, yeah? But Colombia is a really difficult place to get to know, and the first time I went there, it was awkward because middle-class Colombians told me not to speak to strangers, not to get taxis in the street, and not to use public transport. Well, you know, what's left? And so for a social animal like me, that was really, really tricky. And I walked around and I was afraid all the time, and if a Colombian approached me in the street, I thought, God, they're going to mug me. Well, they never did, of course. And gradually, over a period of time, I started talking to these dangerous Colombians. And everyone I met wanted to help me, and everyone I met wanted to engage with me. And at the end of every conversation, every Colombian always says, when are you coming back? And so I did go back. And I went back and back and back. And I stayed with my new friends, and then they passed me on to their friends, and then I stayed with those friends. And as I opened up my heart to Colombians, I discovered a really special people indeed. So this winter, I went back for a 6-week period. It must have been around January. And my confidence now is at an all-time high. I'm quite cocky. Nothing's ever happened. My Spanish is good. I've got friends everywhere. I feel like Colombia is my second home. And I was asked to give a talk on climate change at a university up in the north in a place called Valle de Par. Has anyone here been to Colombia? Yes, okay. So Valle de Par is up near the Venezuelan border, and what you need to know is that it's very, very hot. And it also is currently plagued by Zika virus. And so I went up there and not too bothered about this. And the day came for the talk in the university, and my friend and I, we went along, and there was a packed out auditorium. And first of all, we had to stand to attention to sing the regional anthem. And then we had to stand to attention to sing the university anthem, so there's a lot of singing. And then finally get up on the stage, and I strutted my stuff, and I told everyone in the auditorium about Scotland's climate change programme. Well, we must have said something right because the Mayor's office signed up immediately to new commitments on climate change. So that was all very successful. Came back to the house of my friend. We were giddy with our success and the heat because it was about 40 degrees when I started to feel unwell. And then I felt really unwell. And I had my trousers tucked into my socks to stop the Zika mosquito bites. And I'm thinking maybe one's got through. And then I spent a really torrid night in the bathroom. And I think I probably vomited up my entire previous existence. I can laugh about it now. And in the morning, I was collapsed in my host's osteopath clinic. He had a little clinic in the house, which was the room with the only air conditioning in the house. Imagine being punched in the face on the right, and then on the left, and then on the right every minute. That's trigeminal neuralgia, and it's absolutely horrific. And so I was laying out in this room, whimpering, curled up in a fetal position, thinking I was going to die when I met the star of this story, Rafa. Rafa was a local GP. He didn't speak English. He'd never met a tourist before. He was the doctor and very good friend and relation of my host. So Rafa comes into the room and he sees me there. Now, I could barely look at him, never mind string a sentence together in Spanish. However, he took quiet control and he checked things out and called his nurse from his practice. The doctors just work on their own in Colombia. They're not in a big organized group. And she turned up and they put the drip in and gave me various drugs. And then what I expected to happen and what I would expect to happen here is in Scotland is the GP would spend, 15 minutes? 20? If we're lucky, maybe 30. But no, Rafa just sat down beside me for a couple of hours. He didn't speak, but he just emanated a reassurance, a gentleness, as if he had nothing else to do in the world but just sit beside me. Wasn't in my face, just sat there. And it was this initial, really compassionate response that was to keep me going for the next very traumatic 3 weeks. Because what then happened was that my right leg and foot from the old Seafield Road incident doubled in size, and this was cellulitis. The next day, Rafa turns up and had a good look and made an assessment and said, look, this is all in Spanish, so I translate, obviously. Kirsty, you really should be in the hospital. Normally this sort of condition, we'd have you there for 6-7 days. But I can keep you in the house here and look after you, and you will be safe if that's what you prefer. Because somehow Rafa had understood that I'm terrified of hospitals after my various incidents with NHS Scotland. Now, I am really nervous and embarrassed when someone is compassionate towards me. I don't know how you feel, but I don't like it, okay? And I have an independence wall, and my shutters come down. And it takes a really special person to be able to get through that. And here I was, sitting in Bayou du Par with Rafa, who didn't even speak my native language, and I'm handing him over my precious leg and my precious foot and my soul. And why I did that, I think, is not because what Rafa did or what he said, but because of the way he made me feel. And he made me feel nurtured, accepted, a part of the place. I felt like a member of his family. And what he did through his compassionate response was completely remove my fear of being ill in a very difficult country, a long way from home. And it was only when I was putting together this talk that I realized what a lot of courage that must have taken for Rafa. Because he was not used to tourists, he was not used to dealing with insurance companies, and here I was in this quite difficult town with very limited resources, And his compassionate response was to look after me and keep me out of the hospital, when he could so easily have absolved responsibility. So the days progressed, and things were going slowly, but in the right track, until day 5, when the osteopath's clinic was required by the osteopath. Disaster. So I had to move out of this home where I felt comfortable and safe into a hotel. Rafa didn't know this, and I got there and things fell apart. My legs started to swell again, my toes discolored, the headache was back, and I was in this hotel on my own, weeping. And 3 hours later, Rafa turns up, like some miracle. And Rafa had popped round to the house to see where I was, discovered I wasn't there, panicked, and asked my friend if he could come and visit me. He looked at me and said, "Kirsty, this is now time for the hospital." And I said, "If you think it's time, Rafa, I trust you and we'll go." It took us 5 hours to navigate the admission process into that hospital, and Rafa was with me the whole time until midnight, when Rafa finally had to go home because he does have a really lovely wife and 3 gorgeous children. About 12 hours after that, I finally got my own room in the hospital. And it was at that point I discovered why Rafa was so compassionate and why he was trying to keep me out of that hospital. I went in, and at this point I should say I'm not allowed to walk. In the hospital room there was 1 bed, a bottom sheet, a drip stand with stuck wheels, and nothing else. No top sheet, no pillows, no blanket, no towels, no water jug, no water, no soap. There wasn't even a bell to ring the nurse. And I'm dumbstruck by this. And immediately I'm thinking, if this is the state of the resource, what is the state of the healthcare? And then I summoned back my memories of Rafa, and I thought, if he says it's okay to be here, then it will be. And so I stuck it out. Now, I was 3 days in that hospital, and by now Rafa should have disappeared from my life completely. But oh no, Rafa is on the end of text messages, checking how everything is going. And I was then shifted from there into a hotel for 3 days while I'm waiting for an air ambulance to Bogota. Has Rafa disappeared? No, he's still there. I then spent 8 days in a 5-star hotel in Bogota. Rafa is still there. And then I spend 6 days with friends in Bogota waiting for my flights back to Scotland. In all of this time, Rafa was a virtual presence, a continual presence, just checking in. Rafa's a bit of a technophobe. He even got WhatsApp on his phone halfway through this process so that we could communicate and that I could send him photographs of my leg to show him how the coloration was going. He told me what to ask the consultants, he reassured me, and it was that continuity of care that kept me going through that whole process. Now, on the 22nd of March, I finally made it back to Scotland 3 weeks late for work. Rafa hasn't been paid yet by the insurance company. Is Rafa still in my life? Yes. Rafa continues on WhatsApp, checking in, telling me what to say to my GP, asking how things are going. A continual, compassionate presence. And so to conclude, I think it's probably worth giving Rafa the final word rather than mine. So about a week ago, I sent him a little text message in Spanish and said, "Rafa, I'm doing this talk." I didn't tell him what it was about, really. I just said it was called Courage and Compassion. And all I was asking him was whether I could use his name, his real name. That is his real name. And Rafa said, and I translate from the Spanish, he said, "Yes," he said, "you can do that." He said, "But there were 2 participants in this story, myself and you, Christina," because they call me Christina in Colombia. And he said, "If you hadn't been open and believed in me, the outcome would have been really different." And he went on to say that the most important thing is that you give when someone is in need, no matter what their language or race, because that is what makes the world a better place. Thank you.